Patrick Christie tonight, only on GB News. Now, has Labour failed on the economy? Time now for the head-to-head. I'll brighten up soon, I promise. Now, dismal new figures today reveal the UK's economy grew by a mere 0.1% between July and September, with the uncertainty surrounding Labour's first budget and high interest rates denting consumer business confidence. It will come as a blow to the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who has promised to grow the economy, of course. She spoke to GB News earlier today.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment, to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investments in Britain.
All right, did you keep up with that? I hope you did. It also emerged that she reportedly edited her CV online, Rachel Reeves, after it was revealed earlier this month that she apparently lied about her previous job roles. In October, the Guido Fawkes website revealed that while she claimed she worked as an economist at the Bank of Scotland between 2006 and 2009, she in fact had a rather more mundane job working in a supports unit. Today, Miss Reeves was caught quietly editing her LinkedIn CV to reflect her true role. So tonight, I'm asking, has Labour already failed on the economy? Let me know your thoughts by heading to gbnews.com/yoursay or tweet me at gbnews, and while you're there, vote in the poll. I'll bring you the results very shortly. Going head-to-head on this now are political commentator Matthew Stadlen and media campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, William Yarwood, who are both in the studio keeping me company. William, have the wheels fallen off the Labour wagon already when it comes to the economy?
Well, good evening, Ben, and thanks for having me on the show. I think the first thing to point out is that a lot of these predictions were done before the budget. So the ONS statistics that were released today showing, like you said, that growth had been rather anaemic at 0.1%. A lot of that was caused by the speculation around the budget about what Rachel Reeves would do and what wouldn't do. And also during that period of time, Rachel Reeves spent a lot of time essentially trashing the UK economy, which undermined business confidence. And one thing also, interestingly, was that Rachel Reeves and also other Labour Party figures were clearly sort of testing the waters about what they might put in the budget, including the employers' national insurance, which they did indeed hike, which obviously didn't engender any confidence in the business sector. So, in reality, you know, we shouldn't be too surprised at these statistics, but when it comes to what the effects of the budget are going to be on future GDP stats, we're going to have to find out.
Well, why did they leave it so long, then, to A, do the budget, and B, keep it so top secret, at least try and calm the markets? Matthew Stadlen, what's your thoughts on this Labour administration?
A rather balanced view from my fellow redheads.
That's what we're all about here.
You're teeing us up to have a good old fight on a Friday night.
GB News is all about balance and fair debate.
Listen, I think it's quite interesting that Rachel Reeves is doing interviews now with GB News, because that was not always the case.
Probably because we've got more viewers than Sky News day in, day out, week after week.
I suspect she sees some votes in GB News viewers, and she wants to make sure that come 4 years' time, 5 years' time, they aren't all entirely alienated from a Labour government. So I think that's obviously good for you guys, good for the station. But I think it's probably sensible from the Labour government as well. You need to reach people, you need to speak to people. And GB News viewers, some of them will have voted Labour in the past.
Well, there was a poll out some months ago saying that, I can't remember, but a very high amount, more than expected, GB News viewers were voting Labour, so that's certainly true. And also, but whilst we're on this topic, credit to Wes Streeting, who comes on the channel a lot, and I'll say it again for another night, I think he's one of the most capable Labour ministers in the Cabinet. But look, just going back to the growth figures. In June, Matthew, on June the 12th, I've been doing some rummaging on your Twitter.
Oh, my goodness.
You said...
Is there anyone still left on the left on Twitter? There's been a mass exodus.
Yes, you've all left.
they claim they're going, but they're still posting, a la you. June the 12th, you said, the UK economy has stalled. Didn't Sunak promise us growth? Are you going to be tweeting the same thing for Labour?
No, because this is very, very early days, and I agree with William on that. And I think there's something in what you said as well about Starmer, and I think they went too far on this, but Starmer and Reeves were telling us, weren't they, specifically Starmer, that things were going to get worse before they got better. And they were trying to force some tough medicine, much-needed medicine, they would argue, down our throats ahead of the budget. And they were then accused by the right-wing press of talking the economy down, talking the country down, and that probably had some sort of impact on business. Apart from anything else, this is very, very early days. Yeah, the figures are not great. Of course they're not. We all want growth. I keep coming on GB News and reminding everyone that we're all in it together. If we don't get growth, it's not just the Labour government that will struggle at the polls next time round. It's not just Labour MPs who might lose their jobs. We will all suffer as well. The question, and I think this is the right at the nub of it, is the right thing to do to hit businesses in the way and to the extent that she did, Rachel Reeves. And only time will tell. I totally understand why she has ploughed money, and it could have ploughed a lot more into public services like the NHS, which is on its knees, and into building and into schools. We need our children educated in good schools. If you have all those services flourishing, rather than being damaged as they have been by 14 years of the Tories, then you can get growth. But we don't know the answer because she's, in a sense, given with one hand and taken away with the other.
William, should Rachel Reeves, should she have put so much money into public services?
So the issue here is to do with how Labour actually ran on. Labour ran on a reform of the public services, and you mentioned Wes Streeting earlier there. Wes Streeting seems to be one of the few Labour politicians that's genuinely committed to reform of the health service. As he saw the other day with his speech, he's going to be creating a league table of NHS trusts and essentially naming and shaming failing ones. I think that's actually quite an impressive and quite bold step forward for the Health Secretary to do. But then the problem is also then Labour in the government, in the budget, did put more money into the NHS as sort of a down payment.
What about this alleged lie from Rachel Reeves CV? How can we trust Rachel Reeves as a Chancellor handling Britain's purse strings when apparently she can't even get her CV right?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting comment. I mean, the point with Reeves specifically and Starmer specifically also is another lie they told in the manifesto, which is they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. Now, the issue is none of them can define what a working person is.
Well, they say Starmer is.
Well, apparently so.
Well, come on, he does work hard, Starmer.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
he does.
Six-figure salary, £2.5 grand specs,
yeah, he
free
works
Arsenal
hard.
tickets, free
He
Taylor
works
Swift
hard.
tickets, free horse racing tickets. He's a working man. And do you know who they say aren't working people? Farmers.
Oh, no,
farmers.
Listen, who get up
at the crack of dawn.
They don't say that.
Yes, they do.
No, of course
they
they
just
don't.
whack them with inheritance tax. No taxes on working people, apparently.
Listen, farmers work unbelievably hard.
I can't believe you're sticking up.
They're talking about inheritance tax. They're not taxing farmers' income. They didn't say anything about that they wouldn't bring up inheritance tax. What they talked about was income tax, VAT, and national insurance. And yes, that's a grey area because you could make the argument they were talking about employees NICs, but in the end it was on employers. So that's a grey area.
They said we will not tax working people, and they've slapped farmers with a devastating tax, which is going to destroy farms.
It depends what you mean by a tax on working people.
Well, there we go.
I don't think people think of inheritance. No, hang on. I don't think that people think of inheritance tax when you're talking about taxing working people. But yes, that is entirely open to you as an interpretation. It's not what I would have seen, but it's clearly what you would have seen.
William, one more point to you. Labour bang on about the fact they inherited such a mess. The fact of the matter is, inflation was down to 2%. GDP figures for the first 6 months of this year were the best in the G7, and the best for many decades, in fact. Mortgage rates coming down, cost of living coming down. Things were starting to look better. So can you tell me, please, on what planet did they inherit such an economic mess?
Well, I mean, obviously...
I'll tell you.
Well, you can tell me in a second.
Well, obviously this one. Look, I'm not going to sit here and defend the last 14 years of Tory government. That's not what I'm going to do. I mean, Conservatives constantly talked about growth and they did nothing to actually promote growth, including house building and infrastructure building. But one thing I will say is that Reeves, basically, if she wants to see these economic figures change, she needs to actually put a proper plan for growth in, which actually would involve reversing the employers' national insurance hike.
Did they inherit a mess or not?
They inherited a mess, sure.
How though, based on those figures I just gave you?
So the mess...
Where's the mess?
So the mess basically is to do with the fact that they inherited a high tax burden, which is obviously true. They inherited a high deficit, which is obviously true. They inherited a debt which currently sits around 2.5 trillion, which taxpayers are paying 102.2 billion pounds a year on.
How much have previous Labour governments contributed to that?
Oh, yeah, significantly. It's just politics as usual. They blame each other for everything.
While it is true that there was 0.5% growth in the final 3 months of that Tory government, and that is 5 times bigger than the 0.1% growth we've seen now, although there are the caveats that we've both mentioned. It is also true that Rishi Sunak, in the very short stay in number 10 that he had, took us into a recession, and public services, as we keep saying, and we know, and viewers will know this because they'll be on waiting lists, like my relatives, are on their knees. And the economy was not strong. Cost of living had been high, mortgages have been high, and as you've said, look at debt, look at deficit. Really, tax is already relatively high. Really difficult for the Labour government not to raise some taxes, not to borrow, because if you don't plough money into our public services, you cannot have a country that encourages growth. There was no investment in the Tory years, or very little investment. Look at our infrastructure, it's crumbling.
All right, last question to you, Matthew, last word. How much time and goodwill do you give Labour? Say we get another set of...
Well, I ask myself this question all the time, because you guys want me to come on and sort of defend Labour, and where I think it's right and fair that they're defended, I will defend them. But of course, as a journalist,
when are you going to fire
as a journalist, I've got to scrutinise them. If we don't get growth in the next year, growth that we can sort of hang a peg on, then we're all in trouble. It's not just me and my predictions. We are, as a country, in trouble if we don't grow the economy.
Got it. If you're still on X in a year's time, I expect to see...
I've never said I'm leaving, mate. I've never said I'm leaving.
Well, most of your cohorts are crying into their muesli and
well,
going
somebody
to
who
Blue
says,
Sky.
listen, I've been coming on this channel time and time again into the lion's den to have polite fights with the likes of you.
I'm a lover, not a lion. All peace in this neck of the woods. William Yarwood, Matthew Stadlen, thank you very much for a fascinating debate. So who do you agree with at home? Has Labour failed on the economy? Sarah on X says, trashing our economy appears to be their goal. Charles on X says, can't judge until 2 years in. Yeah, similar to what Matthew's saying. And your verdict is now in. 97% of you agree Labour's failed on the economy, while 3% of you say they haven't failed. Matthew, what do you think of that poll?
I think it sounds like a GB News poll, but GB News viewers' views count, and that's why Rachel Reeves is giving interviews to your channel.
Quite right indeed.